call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.
What up? Welcome back once again to the Necro Zoo. I am Boom. And in this one, let's go ahead and add one more figure to my McFarlane DC Multiverse collection. Now today we will take a look at our first figure from the Plastic Man wave, recently released by McFarlane. Now this wave is starting to hit retailers and starting to ship out from different online stores. And of course there are platinums for 3 out of 4 of these figures. But of course I will be reviewing the standard versions, culminating at the end with a look at our highly anticipated Plastic Man figure. Now it's actually pretty rare that we get this version of Aquaman, which is the hook hand version, very reminiscent of the 90s stylings, but for hardcore collectors is a very wanted version of Aquaman. Now this guy looks very powerful in the packaging, but let's go ahead and take a closer look at it. But first, he does come with your standard black DC Multiverse stand. Now, of course, these are not really needed. I usually don't have a hard time standing these figures. It just takes a little bit of skill. You can't expect them to come right out of the package and stand up on their own. But once you get the hang of it, get a little dip in the knees, use the articulation to get them to find a center of gravity, and most of them are easy to stand. He also comes with his data file card. On the front, you do have an image from the comics representing this 90s styled version of Aquaman. And although I don't think he's one of the, more popular versions of Arthur Curry, there is a good amount of collectors that really like this 90s version, giving us a little bit of nostalgia. Now this image is pretty crazy. If you look at his eyes, really has those psycho eyes going on. Pretty interesting. On the back, you do have some information. Pretty sweet. We'll hold on to that. Now, as far as accessories go, there is none. I really wish they would have given at least one alternate hand. And the other thing is that I do get it. The whole upper body and the head are completely new sculpts, but the lower body is all reuse. So I do think they could have added at least an alternate hand, because we do know that this version of Aquaman doesn't usually have his traditional trident, mostly because his weapon is permanently affixed to his left hand. But it is still a little bit disappointing. Now, he does come with the 2 arms for Plastic Man. Not going to get too much into these. We'll look at these more when we actually review the Plastic Man figure. But for what they are, they look really cool. So we'll hold on to those. Now let's take a closer look at this awesome Aquaman figure. Now, first impressions, I have to say, I am one of the small minority that really loves this version of Aquaman. And as I stated before, we don't usually get this version in action figure form. Although there have been some pretty nice ones, specifically going back to the 90s to the whole Total Justice wave. That is where we actually first saw this guy. A really short-lived line, but it does have some awesome renditions of characters from the DC universe, and it actually has a nice little variety. You get a couple of females, some villains, and multiple Batman. But these are figures that I actually do remember seeing in stores. Although, as they are really small scale, I think they're like 4 inches or maybe 5 inches. They've never been my particular cup of tea. and also the 3 points of articulation. Wasn't really all that exciting, but for the designs and the way they look together, it is very awesome. So, for a representation of this version of Aquaman, this is pretty nice. I like to say they did add a lot of little dings and damage to the armor side of him, all the way even into the straps. And even onto the back, you still have that little sculpted detail of the damage, giving this figure a lot of cool depth, at least for the parts that have sculpt work. And of course, you have his traditional hook hand. Now, I'm pretty happy with this. Just with first looks, this is going to be awesome to add to my Aquaman collection. We've actually received a good amount of Aquaman in this line, which is always very exciting to see. And if you really want to delve into it, you got live action version, comic versions, many different versions that you can choose from. Now, taking a look at the head sculpt, I really like this head sculpt more because when I kind of picture in my mind McFarlane making a bearded, long haired Aquaman, this is more what I really envision. Now, although I do enjoy the original Rebirth Aquaman, actually really love that figure, this is more what I would come to expect from a sculpt work from McFarlane. So I'm really pleased with the head sculpt. You got the long hair flowing nicely. You actually got two ears, even though one is covered. And the beard is sculpted out very nicely. Now the eyes, that's the only part where I'm like on the fence. I mean, they're fine, they look straight, but there is something I just do not like about them. To give it 100% positive review, but it's up there. It's about 85-90% well done. Now, you do get some pretty nice articulation, even though he has that long hair. You can look down really well. You can look up, but the bad part is that the hair kind of pushes his head back down. But if you do figure photography and you want to have him have a constant, look up, all you have to do is get some putty or a piece of fodder and raise up his head and then stick it in there just to lodge it in a looking up pose. And then you can take your photo, and once you're done, you can pop off the head and remove the little piece of fodder. So that's just, a little tip. You do that right to left. And of course, you can tilt his head for some attitude. Pretty sweet. Now, I'm not going to go too much into body articulation because, once again, we've seen this before. You got that really nice and smooth waist swivel. Now, this is all new sculpt on the upper body. You got some new abdominals. Plus, you have that added sculpted out body armor, but you have the same articulation like in the shoulder. You do have that hook hand on his left hand, and one thing that's nice is you can actually swivel it. But on the other right hand, you just have one fist as an option. Now, if you really wanted to, you could pop off this hand. I think I found that the John Kent wrist joint actually works really well. Instead of the blunt ball joint that they went back to with this figure, which I don't completely hate, but I actually prefer the sculpted out wrist joints. And once you get that John Kent wrist in there, you can actually open up your range of hands that you can add to this figure. But I actually have no problem with the fist. Now, going down to the lower body, this is a negative that I kind of have with this figure, and that is that on the side of the pants, it should actually be like real actual scales, kind of like the way they do the Aquaman upper body and in the other figures they have released. That should actually be running down the side of the leg. And of course, they went the less expensive route and they just painted in some scales, which It's not a deal breaker, but I really wish they would have, tried some way to get some added sculpt on here. Now that would have made up for the complete lack of accessories with this figure. So although, as I said, I'm not completely disappointed, it is a little bit irritating. But you have the same lower body we've seen before. Looking at them from the bottom, just some identifying marks. Now, I do love the fins that McFarlane has for these original lower bodies. They are sculpted out beautifully, but then you move into the back and it's just, that completely new upper body armor. Some nice muscle tone, I'll give them that, and great articulation. As you can see that in the front crunch, this guy almost gets an L shape to the front crunch, which hopefully means that they are still working on giving these figures more range crunching forward. But this one is exceptional. So all in all, articulation is nice and smooth. Design is great. You got the hook that very much is a part of this version of Aquaman, plus the armor on the upper body. Now, there is one glaring thing that a lot of people were talking about, and that is that he has no nipple. Now, we do know that McFarlane can do nipples. Of course, we had the George Clooney version from Batman and Robin, where the suit actually had the bat nipples. Another figure that I know has nipples is, of course, the Hawkman. So I kind of used that version to give me some idea of what I wanted to do. Now, I surprisingly, it wasn't as easy as I thought. I did actually first make a version with like a little areola, and it just looked too clumpy and it just was too prominent on the chest. It would have stuck out really far and gave him some eraser nipples. So I scratched that and I moved on to a smaller, a thinner slither of niplet that I actually made. Now, once I had it ready and I tested it on here, I did mark it using the Hawkman as a guide for the nipple placement because, of course, nobody likes offset nipples. But I have to be honest, I really liked the way it came out. And at first, I thought it wouldn't make a big difference. But in all honesty, it actually does. Now, I never thought I would be saying that I added a nipple to a figure, but here it is, and it really looks good on the figure. Surprisingly, filling out the whole upper chest, and all it took was to add a little bit of nipple. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm a big fan of the free the nipple movement. So this actually works well for me. Now, of course, you know me, you know that I have all of the DC Universe Classics, DC Signature Series figures, and I do have the original version that they did. Now, there is a little story behind this. I'm going to go through it really quick, and that is I used to watch a lot of the Spectre Creative channel because, of course, he's the one that was the line manager of the whole Mattel DC Universe Classics line. And he said that he put a lot of love into this figure. The Four Horsemen actually sculpted it out, and it was part of the signature series. But he was really disappointed when he noticed that this figure did not sell. And he said that was kind of strange because a lot of collectors always said that they wanted this version of Aquaman. And when the product was finally made and put out, it sold really badly. And this is proven because if you go look for this figure right now on the secondary market, he is one of the cheaper DC signature figures that they have. Although they did do a great job, not a big fan of the super flowing water hair, but the armor is great, and they did add the scales to the side of the costume. So that is pretty sad to think that After collectors get what they're clamoring for, they do not actually go all the way through and give the company the sales. Now, luckily, I don't think this version of Aquaman from McFarlane is going to have that same problem. I think he will relatively sell well, but we will still have to see the way he does at retail. Now, for some actual height comparisons, of course, I did put him right next to the recently reviewed classic Aquaman, and he's a slight bit taller. That's probably because of the new sculpt for the upper body. But then I did go ahead and bring out Kyle Rayner just to open up the scaling comparison with this new Aquaman. Now, finally, I don't usually go too much into head swaps. I'll do them if they, seem like they'll work, but I'm not all crazy and have to head swap every head, even if it looks terrible. But I did want to see how this new head sculpt would look on that original Endless Winter Aquaman body. And it's passable. I mean, nothing spectacular, but it does look good. I think I'll still be more of a fan of the original head sculpt for that body, but this new one works great for this 90s version of Aquaman. And another thing I wanted to see was how it looked on the movie Jason Momoa version. Now, this is the Aquaman 2 version, and it actually has something there. I mean, it's not something that I may want to keep permanently, but maybe to make an alternate version of the Justice League or just to do some figure photography, that is a pretty nice head swap. So, all in all, really happy with this figure. I mean, there is some negatives, but I think the positives outweigh that pretty consistently. And it's going to be awesome adding this figure to my DC Multiverse collection. And hopefully, we could start to build up a sort of throwback to the Total Justice line. And now we have the perfect 90s Aquaman to go with your 90s Justice League setup. But anyways, you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.